Good evening. Thanks very much for coming along tonight. We have 4 of the candidates here. I think we're going to spend the first possibly 20 minutes or so talking about the first of the issues, and it's the issue on which we've had most questions. So I'd like to invite Sue Webster, is Sue here, to ask your first question, please, and then we'll have, we've said about a minute and a half for it. Please be concise.
The candidates' view on the proposed closures of the Lick and Cheadle hospitals, and what do they see as the alternative to the service that these hospitals provide? How do you foresee that the NHS providing home care when these hospitals close?
Is that clear?
I'd like to state very clearly that I'm totally against any closure of Leek and Cheadle hospitals, and I was very relieved to learn when I had an update earlier today that the proposals surrounding Leek Hospital have been stopped. The CCG, North Staff's Clinical Commissioning Group, has said that they won't allow the beds to go at the hospital, which is what they'd first suggested. So they have responded quite rightly to the pressure which has been put on people from the local community. Cheadle Hospital, however, which still serves many people in the Moorlands, is still under threat, and I will firmly be fighting any plans for closure or bed reductions there. These hospitals are so important to our local community. When we look at what's going on at the North Staff's Hospital and the pressure that they're under there with A&E services and other services, we must make very best use of the hospitals that we've got in our local community and use them for minor accidents and injuries and ongoing treatments for people. So I am completely behind the hospitals. I know that there is an argument that some people might get better, say, post-operative or long-term conditional care in their home, but it's got to be about what is absolutely right and not just financially expedient for the patient. And I know that the local clinical commissioning group is talking about patients getting better faster in their home. And
Okay.
It's gone. It's gone.
Right, well, keep that microphone turned down, the rogue microphone down. Thank you. Who would like to come in now? Yes, George.
Well, this is actually utterly disgraceful. It's a trend that we're seeing not only across Staffordshire but across the entire country, is the closure of small community hospitals. Where we're going to go is that we have no choice. They're going to turn to Stoke. Cheadle is still under threat, like Trudy said. Thankfully, Leek Moorlands might pull through this. This is an issue, though, that comes from central. It's NHS top-down and not a local funding. The community services will continue wherever these hospitals are shut, but it's the people that I feel sorry for are those that come then out of the hospital, need aftercare, and are going to have to go straight to home or to other community hospitals inside of Stoke-on-Trent. This is a long way for them to drive. It's not good for the patient, it's not good for patient care. The people who I am really feeling for, along with the patients, are the non-clinically trained staff in these hospitals. These are the ones that are not being discussed, that they are going to lose their jobs. They're not clinically trained, so they won't be moved elsewhere, and they're the ones who are going to truly suffer from this.
Thank you. Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, put it quite simply, this is all totally avoidable. We're in a situation now where big politics is using the excuse of austerity, the shortage of cash, to close down services. We've currently got £34 billion in tax avoidance each year. We've got a NHS which has been casualised, privatised and sold off to the highest bidder. The NHS reinstatement bill quite clearly states that we've put back the NHS to how it was 25 years ago. Fully a public good, funded by public services, paid for through direct taxation. The empty promises of free at the point of use is meaningless if that provider is a third-party company whose main intent is to satisfy shareholders. We need the NHS for the people, by the people. The only people that offer that is the Green Party.
John?
It's obviously a completely nonsensical move. We've only just got through what has been described as one of the worst winter crises that we've had at North Staffordshire with the accident and emergency. And the one thing that played out again and again was we have not got anywhere to send these people to. So if you shut down the community hospitals, you're not going to relieve any pressure on that accident and emergency unit. So the complete idea behind this, to me, is nonsensical. It's good to hear that at least Leek has had a postponement. And I would suggest to you, particularly if the Conservatives were to be elected, that is all that you've got. You've got a postponement. I work at Stoke-on-Trent College, and I, today, along with many other people who work there, have been told that our jobs may well be at risk. I shall know tomorrow morning in a very personal email, no doubt from the thing, how I'm going on there, but that's not the point. I'd be worried about the future if the cuts which are coming up, which have been suggested are coming up, come ahead. I would suggest they may well revisit the decision they've now made on Leek. It's dreadful.
Okay, thank you very much. Someone's mentioned the Conservatives. Just to let you know that the Conservative candidate, Karen Bradley, can't be here tonight. And what will happen is later in the week, these same questions will be put to Karen and they will be filmed and recorded. The idea of the filming is that this recording of the event will be made public by website and other means, so it's accessible. The Conservative candidate will be given these questions and these her responses will be recorded. Okay. Now, can I have another question now from Jojo Darren?
Do you believe that privatisation has any part in the structure of the future NHS? If so, how can the NHS continue to provide patient-centred care in line with its core principles and values if the primary objective is to make a profit?
I'd like to come into this first. Yeah. George?
Absolutely not. Privatisation goes against the very principles of the NHS. This country has a covenant with its government whereby we pay slightly more tax than an awful lot of other countries and receive free healthcare for this. There are in place certain trade agreements through the EU to America that is going to allow them to buy up an awful lot of our hospitals, which are operated by the NHS but owned by private companies. And what we're seeing in Leek, and I suspect that's what's going to happen there, is that a private company, large American corporation, will come in and start to buy up our hospitals. We cannot let this happen, and the only way to stop this happen is by leaving the EU. We have tried negotiating with them on this. They are not listening. If we want to keep a free healthcare system in this country, the only way is to leave the EU and stop large American corporations from taking our healthcare away from us.
Thank you. Yes, Julie?
Thank you. I've been campaigning very stridently in the past 12 months against the privatisation of our NHS. I've been involved in the Staffordshire-based Cancer Not-for-Profit campaign group campaigning against the privatisation of cancer and end-of-life care services in Staffordshire. The North Staffs Clinical Commissioning Group has been hell-bent on seeing the privatisation of these services, which would result in profits coming before patients, and that is never, ever acceptable. So I would always prefer to see the NHS services delivered in public hands, where actually the public good comes first and profits are very much not in the equation. Labour has announced this week that there will be a cap of 5% profit on any profits earned by those existing companies who are delivering within the NHS. And moving forwards, Andy Burnham has publicly stated Labour's commitment to making sure that the NHS is firmly in public hands, and that's why we need to repeal the Health and Social Care Act.
Thank you. Yes, right. Thank you. Yeah, again, we're getting smoke and mirrors on this. We were given PFI That was when the door was kicked wide open. And ultimately, we've seen casualisation and privatisation of the NHS through the back door. Only recently, when there was an announcement of a large-scale privatisation, it happened to be that mainstream media was full of Jeremy Clarkson having a bit of an altercation with a member of staff. Our media is complicit in effectively letting this carry on unchecked. For all the empty rhetoric that we get from big politics, we need to get serious and honest with ourselves and say what do we want our NHS for and how are we going to pay for it. If we don't stop tax avoidance, if we don't get serious about how corporations are starting to run our lives from top to bottom, the NHS has no future. Ultimately, only the Green Party are offering an alternative, saying we need to be honest and truthful to ourselves, support public services through public finance and correctly collected taxes, and not letting tax avoiders send money out of the country.
Thank you, John.
When it comes to the privatisation of the NHS, I think we have to recognise that this was a process that began probably in the mid-1970s. Before that, there was private treatment available, or you could fast-track treatment by paying even in the NHS. But it was basically during the mid-1970s that it took off as a concept. In addition to that, what we've seen is governments of both natures, be they Conservative or Labour, increasingly turning towards the private sector to produce what was originally a free at the point of service care that was done for a not-for-profit organisation. The sooner we get back to that, I think the better.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I have a question from Chris Wood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
How do the candidates feel about the concept of people being assessed and being treated in the community instead of receiving treatment in hospital?
Thank you. Would like to start this one?
The assessment of treatment is a very personal circumstance. We can't generalise in any way whatsoever. We need to get back to treatment which is patient-centred, not financially driven. And we also need to make sure that the support services are in place, so as if it is that someone's to be treated at home, that can be done with dignity and with care. We're now seeing support staff out in the communities on minimum wage or worse terms and conditions, on 0 hours contracts, insufficient time to undertake treatment. And ultimately this is devaluing the service and meaning that the users of care are not getting the level of care and dignity that they deserve.
Okay, thank you. Trudy?
Thank you. It's got to be about what's right for the patient, and if there were social care services which were the right services available for the patient, then fine. If it's clinically driven and what is genuinely right in terms of holistic care for the patient, fine. But I think what we're seeing right now is that it often isn't fine, and that people are being shunted out of hospital beds as fast as possible for financial reasons. And I know, because I've been talking to people week in, week out on the doorstep, that many people who've come back from hospital are having inadequate care, and that's not because their carers don't want to give the very best kind of care. They do, but are often interrupted and have to fit in so many different caseloads every day because they've got far too much to do, far too much for one person. And so it's only right and proper that this be properly resourced, and that people be paid fairly as well, because talking to lots of carers, paid carers on the doorstep, they're saying that they don't get paid in between appointments, they don't get paid for travel time, which effectively means that their hourly rate goes below the minimum wage, and that's clearly unacceptable. So it's got to be about putting the patient first.
Okay, John?
It's very simple. There isn't the support out there to provide this service. I think it's very important that anybody with an ailment who needs medical treatment is assessed properly in a hospital first. But to suggest that out there at the present there are the support systems in place to allow this to happen is just nonsensical. It's not there. Today on Radio Stoke, they were saying that there is not enough carers for the people they've already got. Why? Because as Trudy says, they're not paid. It's not a profession people go into. You don't get paid for travelling time. You don't get paid for the whole day. You have a series of appointments. It works out as below the minimum wage. Why would anybody want to go into that profession at the moment?
Thanks, George.
Right, well, this stems from the problem that our hospitals are utterly overwhelmed. Every last one of them, from Stoke to Burton, every one of them is utterly overwhelmed. And we're using community support as a safety net. Now, it's wise to remember that community support has something that has existed for a very long time. My mother is a district nurse, and she's the first to tell you that when it comes to their staff, patient care should be a priority. Unfortunately, it's not only the hospitals that are overwhelmed, it's their staff that are becoming overwhelmed as well. They simply do not have enough people. They are not paid correctly, considering many of them are clinically trained. And this is something that we need to turn around, because every patient needs to be assessed properly to be certain that they can be treated in the best way possible. 9 times out of 10, that is going to be to a hospital first, and then by community afterwards as a safety net. It is not an alternative to being treated in a hospital. It is a backup.
Right, thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to a question from Neil McFadden. You got Neil?
I think my question is also about the NHS, but it's particularly focused on resources, which I think is what really underlines all the detailed questions we've had so far. And it is this: a growing and ageing population, together with increasing medical capability, inevitably means that the NHS will cost more. NHS England's recent 5 years forward view estimates there will be a 30 billion funding gap by 2020. Meanwhile, the public demands the impossible, and I think we've heard that tonight: Swedish level services at US level taxes. When are politicians and political parties going to get serious and honest about funding the NHS?
George.
I haven't heard real honesty. There's a 20 billion funding gap. It's very nice of the Labour Party to promise 2.5. By my reckoning, that's approaching 10%. I think we need a far more fundamental response, and that's why I urged honesty. I understand the Liberal Party is promising £8 billion, but they haven't repeated that promise recently. The Conservative Party is offering to match the cost of living increases, which is fairly farcical, because the problem with the NHS is the costs are genuinely increasing at a level that will not be met by sacking a few managers. It can only be addressed by a serious funding programme by whoever takes government.
Right.
I think the problem with the NHS is a similar problem that we have with all of our public services, and that is an increase in bureaucracy in middle management and in upper management. Now, if you take this healthcare service in Staffordshire Moorlands, it has 3 directors. Now, the same service has received a 40% increase in bureaucracy. Now, if you want to fund it properly, what you need to do is reduce the amount of directors, reduce their pay, reduce their pensions. Reduce the amount of middle management, reduce their pay, reduce their pensions. And every bit of those savings you pour into frontline services, because that is what they are there for. Anyone who's lost their job from the upper or middle management can be retrained clinically, and you will see a much more efficient NHS and every other public service for that matter. That is the future of it. Cut out the middle management and focus everything on frontline services, because that is what is paramount.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, it's a really pertinent point made there, and it's something that needs to be reflected upon. We're not honest about taxation. Taxation pays for the stuff that binds us together. It's what makes us a community, what makes us to be part of something collective. It's not to be avoided or evaded. It pays for the stuff that we need. Unless politics is prepared to be honest with us and say, we need your tax because you want the services, it's going to go. Fundamentally, the race to the bottom on paying conditions is not where we want to be going. We need a living wage for everybody, we need fair taxation for everybody, and we need corporations to pay their piece instead of selling out the country. Because ultimately we potentially have the best service in the world, which is rapidly getting destroyed in the name of austerity, which is a myth. Our society cannot continue to grow, and ultimately we're looking at over 85s doubling by 2037. We're going to get towards 4 million over 85s. They need care, we need plans.
Thank you. Ed Miliband has been very upfront about the need to invest much more in the NHS. There will be, if we have a Labour government, a £2.5 billion Time to Care fund, which will be funded by bankers' bonuses, the mansion tax, which although it won't affect people in the Staffordshire Moorlands, certainly it will be requiring people elsewhere who are fortunate enough to live in a home priced at more than £2 million, to make a larger contribution to the system that we all need and value. You know, our NHS is our greatest, possibly our greatest public treasure, and we must make sure that we fund it appropriately. We have got a problem. I acknowledge that we've got a problem in terms of our expectations and an ageing population, and that's where we need to do much more around preventative work to make sure that we are giving people the access to information and to resources that they need to help to keep themselves as healthy as possible as well. There are a considerable number of illnesses which are preventable, and that's why the work that happens in schools and colleges is so very important. So we need to work on prevention as well as garnering more tax to help to deal with the situation that we've got in the NHS.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think really politicians are by and large very dishonest on this subject. If you want the health services that you desire, and it will cost you more money, and at the end of the day that will come out of taxation. You would hope with the growing economy that we have at the moment, a government would be able to provide more resources over and above inflation into that, but at the end of the day it's a choice that people have to make about the health service. Do you want to pay more for it for the better service? And if you do, then you have to accept the simple fact that it will cost you more money in tax. And it's just as simple as that. There's no getting around that particular thing. To blame it on middle management and all this, that and the other. These are real people, they do real jobs. I mean, it's very easy to talk about bureaucrats and all that type of thing within the NHS. You do have to have people there commissioning various services, buying the drugs, checking that the drugs that they buy are bought at the best possible price. They may all be bureaucrats, but they're all there as safeguards and as ways of making sure we get the best deal for the taxpayers as possible, and just simply turning around saying, well, they don't matter, let's get rid of them and all the problems solved, I think is just complete nonsense.
Thank you. Now, do we have Judy Samuel? Yeah, Judy, do you feel your question's been answered, or is there something else you would like to know?
In terms of the NHS, I think that's fine. In terms of the NHS, I think that's fine. I do have other questions on the list anyway.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
can I make a comment?
Yes, sir. Very briefly.
Continuation of my question.
It's coming down.
Can I just say that I think... Can I just say that I urge the politicians to be honest?
Yes.
And I have heard good thoughts here, but I haven't heard real honesty. There's a 20 billion funding gap. It's very nice of the Labour Party to promise 2.5. By my reckoning, that's approaching 10%. I think we need a far more fundamental response, and that's why I urge honesty. I understand the Liberal Party is promising £8 billion, but they haven't repeated that promise recently. The Conservative Party is offering to match the cost of living increases, which is fairly farcical, because the problem with the NHS is the costs are genuinely increasing at a level that will not be met by sacking a few managers. It can only be addressed by a serious funding programme by whoever takes government.
Right. Do you want to...
Right, sorry to interrupt. We haven't agreed a protocol when we switch to lifetime responses. To be fair to everybody, 30 seconds?
Yes, yes, okay.
quite simple. Marketisation puts 5% of the operating cost in NHS just by the fact of going through the commissioning process. The NHS reinstatement law does away with that because we get rid of the market forces which care for people. Tax avoidance will pay for the balance. Get the taxes due, it will pay for the NHS and all of the public services. There is no need to find new money, just get the money and it's already owed to us all.
Anyone else want to respond to that? George?
Well, firstly, we'd be pledging 3 million, and if potentially we left the EU and cut the foreign aid budget, that's a potential 25 billion pounds that you could plunge into any public service you wanted, and if that is the correct number for the deficit, which I think you're probably right, then we could easily fund it out of that.
Okay, John.
I've already made the case, which I have. I mean, the gentleman has mentioned the fact that we have already pledged the 8 billion. He says there's a £20 million gap. Do you want to pay for it? If you want to pay for it, then that to me is the way forward. Yeah, there's no getting away from the fact it will cost you the money.
Okay, true.
Okay, the forecast additional need for the next 4 or 5 years is 8 billion. If we start talking about 20 billion, it becomes overwhelming. It's 8 billion.
Sorry, the deficit is 20 billion. The NHS has promised to find efficiency savings of 22 billion, which is what reduces the 8 billion. There isn't a cat and health chance
Yes.
to achieve the 22 billion.
I think what we've got to do is progress. I got your point, we must get on.
Okay,
And there'll be
just
discussion
finish.
time afterwards.